Hey everybody, this is Alex Merced from alexmercedcoder.com. And in this video what I wanted to do was do a quick tutorial on FastAPI and Flask in one video. And the reason why I'm going to be able to do that is because I have two templates to help you get started real easily. So this is going to assume that you kind of have some idea of what these frameworks do. They are back-end web frameworks, which are meant for building web servers. So these are not front-end frameworks like React or Vue or Angular that build out your visual UI. These are the back-end servers that essentially relay data when basically users make requests to different URLs. So let's first do Flask. Okay, Flask is like probably the second biggest Python web framework, second to Django. And basically here I have this Flask template. Okay, and basically I'll put the links in the video description, but essentially what you can do is you can click use this template and create a copy that you can work from and then clone it. I'm just going to clone, actually I might as well just do the use this template. And we'll just call this Flask practice project. And I'll make it public, create repository. And see, it creates a new repository that's a copy of the template, so that way I can just work on it from there. So it's going to take a second. And here we go. So now I will clone the code. So I'll copy a little URL, head over to my VS Code. This is Visual Studio Code, which is I'm using as my IDE. Although it doesn't really matter which IDE you're using, generally the basic idea of how this all works is the same. So I want to make sure that there's a terminal opened up in the folder that I'm working out of. Doesn't have to be the terminal in VS Code. Could be a standalone bash terminal or git bash or whatever. But I'm going to do git clone and then paste the URL, and that's going to clone the project. Yay! Now when you open it up, there's a README. And this README I kind of tell you how to kind of get set up. Okay, so essentially what I'm going to do is I'm going to cd into this folder, cd into Flask practice project, and then first thing I need to do is create a Python virtual environment. So a simple one would just be python-m v, and the cool thing is I already have that in my git ignore, so that's probably the easiest way to go, to just stick that name. You could call it whatever you want. I could call it cheese, but let's just stick to the way it's outlined in there. So that creates the virtual environment v. Now I'm going to turn it on, so I do source, because you're basically running some source code, and it's in this folder, in a folder called venv. In there's a folder called bin for binary, and in there's a script called activate that I want to run. I do that, and see, that runs the script that turns on the virtual environment, which I can tell because I see this right over here. And this is assuming you have a version of Python above, I think, like 3.4. Okay, and you can see my particular prompt, because I'm using Starship, which is a custom prompt you can find at just look up starship.rs, and that gives me all this nice information in my terminal. Okay, cool. So I got that going. Okay, and now what I want to do is install my dependencies. So everything that I need to get started is in this folder right here. So the way you do that is that now that I have the virtual environment on, I just do pip install -r, meaning I want to install from a file, requirements.txt. Okay, and that's going to install everything that's in that file. That's done. And technically we're off to go. Okay, so let me go back to my README. So again, everything you need to know is right here. So I could run my server by just running python server.py. Okay, so let's take a look at what server.py does. So server.py imports Flask, which I don't think I really need to in this particular file, but I did. And then I import this function called create app, which is in this app folder. So if you go to this app folder, there's this dunder init file. And again, that's how it knows, like basically whenever you just refer to a folder, like when I say from app, it's going to assume that there's a file called dunder init in it, and that's kind of what it's referring to. Otherwise, it thinks I'm referring to a file by the same name in the same folder. So there either would have to be a folder with a dunder init in it, or a file called app.py, just so you can understand like how the Python import syntax works. So I'm saying from here, import this. So if we go to this file here, I have this function called create app, which, I mean, basically for building your own apps, you don't really need to touch. This just kind of does some boilerplate setting up the Flask app object. So it creates the Flask app object. It's going to update your config, which it does it based on this. Basically here you can inject any kind of variables you want in your config object that you'll be able to use throughout your entire app. Then what it does, it registers this blueprint, meaning your blueprint is where you can write your routes. So here I can write a route. So here we're saying, hey, when you go to the main URL / give back this data as JSON, because what you do is you send back a dictionary, and that gets returned as JSON. And then after that, it creates the CLI. So you could actually go in here to the CLI.py and create. You can just follow this template and just create different CLI commands. More details are in the README. But let's just, so basically everything's kind of there. So basically really you're working out of controllers, config, and then there's a models folder if you ever decide to do like SQL alchemy, more databasey stuff. But let's try that out. Python server.py. Let's see what happens. See, this runs a server which starts on port 7000. That's in the config. So if you go back to config, you see here I have this set up the default to port 7000. So you could change it in there, or you could pass an environmental variable of port. So again, each of these can be overridden through an environmental variable if you want. So if you want to change any of these, you can. Or you can just change them directly in this file. Your choice. This does support a .env, so if you want to use a .env, the directions are in the README. All the directions are in the README. It tells you everything you need to know. Okay, but see, when we start the server, see, it tells us that our server is running on this URL. So now I can go over to my browser and go to 127.0.01. It can also be referred to by writing localhost. So we're running on localhost 7000. And see, this is my home route. Okay, and I can make more routes. Pretty straightforward. I go to controllers, go to my init.py, and I can just write another one. I just could say at home, because I'm using this blueprint that I created. Here it's called home. So you just follow this pattern. So I can say, hey, when someone goes to cheese, run this function. So, def. Okay, and usually the way I name these functions is I'll say home because that's the blueprint, and then the route is cheese, so home cheese. The function name really doesn't matter. Just makes it easier for you to read your terminal output. So in this case, I'm going to return a dictionary. I'll say response. This is not cheese. It's a response. Okay. So then what I'll do is I'll rerun my server, so python server.py. Now I'll head over to /cheese, because that's what we specified as our route. This is not cheese, it's a response. So again, it's just based on whatever we specify right in here. Okay, pretty straightforward, not too crazy. Okay. And that's pretty much how Flask works. I mean, again, there's a lot more you can do. You could have URL params and whatnot, but the idea is that that's fundamentally what it does. It allows us to create a server that when we go to the right URL, let me close this, okay, allows us to create a server that when you go to the right URL, it will generate a response. And that response can be used to deliver JSON data to another website. It could be used to generate a website, the server-side render pages. It could be used, but the basic idea is a user is going to type in a URL, the browser is going to make a request to your server, and then all you're doing is saying, when we get this particular request, run this function that determines the response. That's it. That's all really. That's what a web server is. Okay, and Flask is one framework for building a web server. Okay, pretty neat. Okay, so that's essentially the deal there. Nothing too crazy. And again, more of the finer details are in the README. And there's even a proc file to help you deploy it to Heroku if you want. So lots of useful stuff here. Makes it a lot easier than starting with starting with scratch and trying to figure out how should you set up your files. You can use this template as a guide. But I also did the same thing for FastAPI, a very similar framework. more strictly for building APIs. So let's go to, I want to go to here, go to Alex Merced templates, and then here's the FastAPI template. And then again, I'll use this and say FastAPI practice project. Okay. And that's going to generate a project. And then again, I can copy that. Okay, and then I go back here in the terminal, go back up a folder, back to my lessons folder, cd up, so dot dot for the go up a folder, back in the lesson folder, and then I'll do a git clone and I'll clone this project. Okay. And you see, like this, the way I set this up is I set them up to have a very similar folder structure. So that way it shouldn't really feel that different depending on which one you're using. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to deactivate my virtual environment, because see right now I'm using this, I'm still using that virtual environment, venv. Okay, now I'm going to cd into the FastAPI folder, create a new Python virtual environment, python-m, venv. I'm going to turn that one on. So source./venv/bin/activate. Okay, so that one is on. And then I'm going to install the requirements. Literally, I'm just following the same pattern. Although I'm realizing I didn't do a requirements.txt for this one, so I'll add that. But essentially, if I remember correctly, really the only thing that's here is FastAPI. So I can just do pip install FastAPI. And then that should be it. Let me just take a quick look. Oh, I should also install .env, so pip install Python. I think it's called like python.env. Okay. And just double check, make sure there's nothing else that I've used in here. Nope. Okay. So otherwise this works the same way. So essentially if we go to server.py, okay, it's just running, it's importing this create app function that creates the app object, and then it runs it, except it's using this UV-corn, which actually I should install that as well. Pip install UV-corn, which is a basically what that does, it runs the web server. So you design the web server with FastAPI and then you run it with UV-corn, which is very much like unicorn. Okay, but I do that. So then we go back to this create app function. So I go over here, and you'll see here it creates, again, we're creating this app object that's basically your server, and then we're including a router. So here we don't have the same like CLI features, and the config we can just import as when needed. So the config object, since like basically Flask has this weird sort of config thing that's built into the Flask app object. That's why I did it as a class, or like the way I did it in Flask was like a little bit more involved. Here it's just a dictionary. So here's just a dictionary with your config variables, and you can import this config object wherever you need it. There's a few variables pretty much built in that are used, but you know, nothing. So see, it's imported in here and used to kind of initialize things, but otherwise nothing super crazy. But again, all your routes you'll write under controllers. And this works pretty much the same way. There's a router called home, and you just write your routes pretty much the same way. So if I wanted to say at home.get, meaning a get request to cheese. Okay, and then again, I just have to create a function. But except this has to be an async function. That's sort of the big difference. FastAPI takes advantage of a lot of Python's newer asynchronous features. So home cheese return response, and again you can send whatever you want. Response, you did it. Okay, cool. Let me get out of this Python REPL. Exit. Okay, so now that we have all that set up, let's actually run the server. So Python server.py. Oh, I see I have two terminals open. Let's go back over here. Here we go. Python server.py. Okay, so it's running the application. Once again, I have it set up on post 7000. So if I go here and I refresh, see, it still works. So they pretty much work the same way. But a cool thing you can do in FastAPI is that when you're running a FastAPI server, I can go to /docs, and it takes me to this. And this actually will list all your endpoints that you have in your FastAPI, and you can actually test them out from here, which is pretty cool. So I can go here and say, hey, try it out. Execute, and see, it executed it, and I see I got the response, you did it. So which makes it really nice for testing a lot of different endpoints. So that's pretty cool. Okay, but otherwise, you know, a lot of the same patterns apply, but real quickly you got some exposure to FastAPI and Flask, and a cool template you can use to get started in them pretty quickly. My name is Alex Merced from alexmercedcoder.com. Have a great day and enjoy. Turn off that server and stop the recording.